And now on to part 3 of this video about how U.S. conservatives and libertarians have utterly lost their mind on the subject of inflation. We revert back to Karthik's law of inflation, where all of these 8 principles continue to manifest whenever these conservatives and libertarians generally are trying to create an entirely fictitious alternate reality. As we have seen, presenting anecdotes as evidence of inflation, insisting that inflation is deliberately understated, and using arguments that presuppose that human prosperity today is lower than 2050 or 200 years ago are just their opening moves. And it is truly insane how desperate they are to believe something that is not true so that they can play the victim. And as a result, U.S. conservatism and libertarianism seems to be inundated with a victim mentality, nihilism mindset, which is exactly what made the left unappealing in the first place. Now the right has become entirely victim mentality, pessimistic, nihilistic. Here's the thing, because these are all circular logic points, and there are groups of people who just want to repeat these things back to each other, there's no end to the use of these points. Consider presenting anecdotes as evidence of inflation. Longtime viewers of this channel know that a few months ago, the main anecdote that they used was framing lumber prices, which is something that I debunked in this video up here in the upper right-hand corner. Framing lumber prices went high and then went back down to where they were before, as though nothing had happened. After that, the big anecdote was butter. But peak insanity happened after that, when the anecdote used was the price of eggs. The price of eggs is what really drove a lot of conservatives and libertarians past the point of no return in terms of their insanity. I addressed that in this video up here, which I made when egg prices had temporarily spiked up a little bit, and I said with great certainty that the price would come down. So let's look at some video clips from that video I just linked to. This is the average price of eggs, grade A, large, cost per dozen in U.S. city average from the Federal Reserve, going back to 1980, so 43 years. Look at how it was flat for 20 years, then it started to rise. Now, number one, is this really a dramatic rise within the historical context? If you're going to cherry pick this rise as being steep, what about the 20 plus years during which it was flat? The compound annual growth rate over this entire series of 43 years is virtually nothing, number one. And number two, I am certain it's going to fall very quickly, just like it did before. But even so, how many eggs are you really eating? If a dozen eggs costs $4.25 now, are you really eating more than 4 eggs a day? Even 4 eggs a day is a lot. That's 28 eggs per week. Unless you are a bodybuilder or a sumo wrestler who is also on a tight budget, I cannot see eggs being a significant percentage of your income. And if eggs became cheaper, would you really eat much more of them? Let's say eggs fell back to the 2020 or 21 price. Are you going to eat omelets much more often? At one time, it seemed that conservatives formed their opinions based on verifiable data, and that it was the leftists that were more emotional about using anecdotes to push a narrative. But conservatives have now devolved to the same anti-intellectual culture. I mean, there are actually people losing sleep about the price of eggs because of this rise here, which is not unusual considering the entirety of this series. They're losing sleep over this. This is funny. This is actually funny. Now, if you go to a conservative website like Instapundit, you see how anti-intellectual a formerly intelligent website has become. This is Instapundit, and I just have done a search for eggs. One word, eggs. How Colorado's cage-free egg law could impact prices. Why are eggs so freaking expensive by Ed Driscoll. This is a multi-blogger website, remember, so it's not just one person who is obsessed with eggs. This is ridiculous. Eggs now hottest item to be smuggled from the U.S. to Mexico. I highly doubt that's being done in volume. Eggs are $8, but White House wants you to know inflation is gone. So let's click on this article. This is even more ridiculous. Now, this is written by Steven Cruiser. Eggs are $8. Again, that's bogus. But he wants you to make that into a partisan thing. And you can read all this. It's crazy how, oh, eggs are gone and now we're not going to ever have omelets anymore and so forth. It's beneath the dignity of the intelligent viewers of this channel to even rebut this line by line. But the point is, how can they be hysterical about something so anecdotal that can possibly be a significant portion of your expenditures? If you really want to look at inflation, that is one of the main themes of this channel. The thing to look at is the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, which over 10 years has been in deflation, but even over 3 years, You can see commodities had a brief peak and have been falling for quite some time. So rather than being happy that oil prices are falling and natural gas prices are plunging, these Republican conservatives are screaming about the price of eggs. So that was what the situation was with egg prices a few months ago, and how many conservatives were utterly losing their minds about the price of eggs. And after I posted this video, there were some commenters who came by who said that looking at data is wrong and one should only judge inflation based on anecdotes, because that way it's easier for them to reinforce what they already believe. Remember, they don't want to know the truth. They just want confirmation that what they already believe is the truth, even if they have to get that confirmation from very faulty anecdotes. So look at some of these comments. There's this person, Jim Brown, over here. So his opening statement itself is, "This is what you can't seem to understand, Karthik." Can't seem to understand. That's his opening sentence. The index doesn't matter. And then he goes on this long screed about how you should not look at an index because he doesn't understand what an index is. He said, you have to judge inflation by anecdote because why? Everybody eats eggs. And I say, well, eggs are just not a very high percentage of people's expenses, and they're about to fall in price very quickly. He just couldn't comprehend that. His entire rebuttal was to repeat that. Don't you know that everybody eats eggs? Don't you know that everybody eats eggs? That's all he could say. And when I explained to him what an index was, that you can only measure inflation by taking the prices of all consumer goods, which includes the ones that rose and the ones that fell, and have an appropriate weighting of those goods based on frequency of purchase and price of those items. And then you have a relatively accurate index. And the CPI is such an index, but if you don't like the CPI, the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index is even better. He just could not comprehend that. That concept was fundamentally above his intellectual capacity, because all he could say is things like this. Eggs are used in many forms of baked good, pastas, etc. Don't you know that everybody eats eggs? And the reason this commenter's arguments are truly legendary is because he hit on all 8 of Karthik's laws of inflation, all 8 of the mistakes that a person would make, saying the index doesn't matter, debating by anecdote, being averse to numbers, everything. He just hit on that. If you ever wonder about the person whose entire worldview about inflation is based on his wife's boyfriend's parole officer's opinion, this Jim Brown person is that person. I've never seen someone so entirely energetic about saying, don't look at data, only look at anecdotes. Now, since people like this are hysterical about the price of eggs, and this was 5 months ago, let's see what happened since the price of eggs was high, as we saw in that video clip from that earlier video. This is that same Federal Reserve price of eggs chart from earlier. And as you can see, after being high for just 1 month, January of 2023, the price of eggs plunged. It rose sharply and it plunged. And if we take a shorter 5-year chart, you can see this with more precision. So all that hysteria about eggs was based on 1 month. It rose and it fell, and now it's back down to pretty much what it was before. This is what is known as a complete non-event. Nothing happened. This made some people hysterical, but it was the absolutely most insignificant thing you could possibly think of. And it was high for an extremely short time, and then it fell just as fast as it rose. Again, a complete non-event. Nothing happened. This is not even a footnote of a footnote of a footnote in the history of inflation. That is why I say these conservatives and libertarians have lost their minds on the subject of inflation. And this fad about not looking at data and just brute forcing anecdotes and other memorized lines is really why the credibility of conservatism and libertarianism has gone down the drain. And that's why it just cannot be taken seriously, because their entire worldview has precluded anything positive from happening. It has become extremely anti-intellectual and nihilistic. And if you dislike losing in life, you should have nothing to do with these particular political factions, especially when they're talking about inflation and money printing and so forth. So this is the conclusion of the 3-part series about how conservatives and libertarians in the United States have utterly lost their mind about inflation, and how they don't seem to mind that they get hysterical about things that quickly reverse themselves, and how none of their predictions are ever correct. I hope you found this informative, and if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Thank you very much for watching.